So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Welcome to our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. It's great to be with you every week. Thursdays, we talk about marriage, dating, relationships. Today, I want to hear from you. What do you remember about your marriage vows? We'll be discussing what those vows were and why they actually counter some of our greatest struggles today. Do you struggle in your marriage to want control? Do you struggle in marriage to always have this attitude of it's about what I get? Or do you have fear? Do you struggle sometimes to seek emotional intimacy and friendship with other people? Or sometimes fail to prioritize your marriage first? Or put hobbies first even? You struggle with the idea of children. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. What do you remember about your marriage vows? I would love to hear from you. Also, today we're going to be discussing one of the luminous mysteries, and that is the mystery of the wedding feast at Cana, the very first public miracle that Jesus Christ performs, and he performs it within the context of a wedding. What can we learn about marriage, but really about the spiritual journey of us as individuals trusting in God and understanding that Jesus Christ and the Blessed Virgin Mary are the new Adam and the new Eve, the new perfection of humanity. So what can we learn about the wedding feast at Cana and their interaction? We're also going to discuss something I want to hear your thoughts on. Should men be stay-at-home dads? Does it cause conflict between the husband and wife? Does a wife still respect her husband? And does a husband respect himself? Maybe you found yourself in this situation. You have something to say. Or maybe, especially gentlemen, you might be extremely opposed to the idea of stay-at-home dads. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The number's 1-888-914-9149. Also coming up, we're going to discuss a return to one family income. Why? Because the majority of men and women, families, actually want this. And many of the polls, this is what it shows. We'll discuss that and how that can happen. And maybe you yourself have found yourself able to survive on one income as a family in 2021. People believe it's not possible. How have you made it happen? With simple tips. Numbers 1-888-914-9149. So my first question is, what do you remember about your marriage vows? I've been married for just a couple of years. Praise the Lord. I got married the year prior to COVID rearing its head here in the United States. I can't imagine having planned a COVID wedding. Lucas, our producer here, actually had a COVID wedding. Happy 1-year anniversary, just a little over a year for he and his wife, Gina. Many prayers for all of those who are married during COVID and who are planning a wedding at this time. What do you remember about your marriage vows? When I was thinking about this, I was really thinking about, well, what was I, thinking entering into, we were told to memorize our vows beforehand, and I did a lot of studying and research and work in the area of marriage and family. And so I understood at the heart of the vows were these understanding and the kind of areas of being free, total, faithful, and fruitful. We'll break down what that is in just a moment. But as I was about to get married, and I remember walking down the aisle and being in the midst of the ceremony, the question I asked myself now a couple years later is, what do I remember about my marriage vows? What I remember first and foremost, and maybe this was your excitement as well, I was excited for the commitment. And I anticipated the responsibility for another person, because that's what I was entering into when I got married. An opportunity for giving and receiving. But what stood out to me was A, the commitment, and B, the responsibility. And I was excited for it. As I said, I anticipated this. Is that what you were excited about when you entered into your marriage? What do you remember about your marriage vows? I'd love to hear from you. The number's 1-888-914-9149. In the midst of our marital vows, there are 4 things in particular that are part of them. One is that we enter into the marriage freely. No one is coercing us, no shotgun wedding. That we're there freely having chosen that marriage. Now, within the context of this freedom, we enter into a marriage that demands a giving and a taking within the context of the marital relationship. Yet so often we enter into marriage and find ourselves in the midst of the marital context of day-to-day life, and we want to take control of each and every situation. We want to control our spouse. We want to control the challenges, the good times and the bad. And we forget that we freely entered into the great sacrament of matrimony in good times and bad, and sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do us part. These were all fundamental aspects of marriage. We knew that we were entering into something freely, knowing that what we would enter into, there was no guarantee of richness. There was no guarantee of joy, of warm and fuzzy feelings. There was no guarantee, necessarily, that your spouse would always remain faithful. There were many challenges that could or would arise. And so at the same time, we tend to suddenly think, well, I want out because of X, or I want out because of Y, or this wasn't what I thought it was, or it's just not the same, the spark's not there. So how do we violate this attitude of freedom? Well, we violate it by suddenly deciding that we want control of a situation in a way that isn't really a reality. You see, when we entered into marriage, we freely chose it. We freely walked into that. And with that, that meant that we relinquished any sense of actual control over what truly and fully would happen at the end of the day. We're called to do our best and to invite God into the relationship, but that control has to be abandoned into the hands of Christ. Another dimension of the marital vows is that we give ourselves totally to our spouse. This total giving of ourselves to our spouse is very important. Why? Because this total gift of self to spouse has to do with an absolute giving, a relinquishing yet again in a respect of what is mine and suddenly everything becoming ours. You see, so often today we have this attitude of contingent love, almost this quid pro quo mindset, a business transaction mindset. You scratch my back, I scratch your back, this is fair. But that's not totally giving yourself in marriage. You see, so often we have this attitude of what I'm going to get out of something, or what I'm going to take or get. Or maybe there's a sense of fear within the context of marriage, and that fear is preventing us from continuing to remember the heart of the vow of a total gift of self to your spouse. Maybe it's fear because you grew up in a broken family and you're afraid of divorce, or you're afraid of divorce because of the culture we live in and the high divorce rate. You see, this total gift of self is so important, and this is why it's a part of our vows that we exchange at the altar before God, with the priest there as our witness, and all of our loved ones who are present. Another one of the dimensions of our vows is the fidelity, that we're going to be faithful to our spouse, faithful to the marital covenant and the vows we've made. Today we live in a world where, I remember some years ago, things such as the Ashley Madison hack. Ashley Madison was an online program that facilitated extramarital relationships. There was a massive hack of the organization, names, emails, phone numbers were released, and people would go and discover that their own spouse was actually involved in a relationship via Ashley Madison that was facilitating extramarital relationships. But it's not just someone who subscribes to Ashley Madison to facilitate a relationship. It's many of us who struggle when we begin to seek intimacy elsewhere, outside of our marital relationships. Where, for example, on a separate level, we prioritize everything and everyone before we prioritize our spouse, our marriage, and our family. Sometimes we even prioritize hobbies. Well, I need my TV time. I need to have my time to watch my shows, to play my games, to do the things I want to do. See, it's so easy to fail in fidelity, not just in terms of intimacy, but in terms of what we put before those commitments we've made in marriage. And finally, The final dimension of the vows that I want to touch on today, as we've discussed the free, total, and faithful, and now fruitful dimension, is that fruitful dimension that we're open to new human life in our marriages, that we're open to the gift of life God may bestow on us, physically, biologically, that we're not subscribing to any form of hormonal birth control, barrier method, or abortion, but also that there's this fruitfulness within our marriage where there's no greed, but an openness, a generosity, where we can actually practice even if there are children or even if there are not. This spiritual motherhood and spiritual fatherhood. I've often said my parents have always had a way of collecting, as I've referred to them, as the lost boys from the neighborhood, from the extended family. These young men and boys who needed to be surrounded by a family, needed to have an experience of unconditional love. By no means is my family perfect, but I saw the spiritual motherhood and fatherhood lived out in my parents in a great way. Maybe you've seen that yourself in your own life, even not being married. Motherhood and fatherhood, spiritually, is something that's meant to be exercised by all of us. Another violation that we can experience and live out against that vow, the dimension of fruitfulness, is this turning in on ourselves as a couple, where we turn in on ourselves and only focus on ourselves, me, myself, and I. No, me, myself, I, and my husband. I remember couple years ago, I was speaking to a woman as I was preparing for my marriage, and she was helping with some of the designs for part of the wedding, and she was talking, incredibly faithful Catholic woman, about her own daughter-in-law and son, and about how they were traveling the world and they had determined that they weren't going to have children. They both were really career-oriented individuals, and how there would be no grandchildren. But how much fun they had, how much they loved each other, and how wonderful this relationship was. And although it sounded like a lot of fun and very joyful, it goes against what Catholic marriage is, that it's ordered, as the Catholic Church teaches, toward the procreation and education of children. And so there can be this turning in on themselves as a couple that can occur. It's so easy in the name of having fun and delighting in one another. Sometimes that delighting in one another can become selfish, self-serving, and distracting. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. I would love to hear from you. What would you like to share about what you remember from your marriage vows? What do you remember? The number's 1-888-914-9149. I'd love to hear from you. Share your testimony of the importance that maybe was or wasn't there when you got married, what this vow meant. If you understood fidelity, if you understood what it meant to be there freely, faithfully. Again, the number's 1-888-914-9149. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. If you'd like to subscribe to the show, go ahead and reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Head over to relevantradio.com/trending. Subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, listen on the podcast, the Relevant Radio podcast, Relevant Radio app. Okay, here's the question of the hour. We're going to discuss, I'll tell you the question of the hour in a moment. In just a little bit, we're going to discuss a return to one family incomes. Why are we talking about this? Because so many men and women want this, even if they find themselves in careers that they love, even if they find themselves in a situation where both spouses are working, both parents are working. Did you know that even studies show that couples who don't have children under the age of 18, whether they have no children at all or their children have left the nest, even then, the woman wants to remain home and be a homemaker? We'll come to that in a minute, but first, the question of the hour. And if you have a thought on this, give me a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149. Should men be stay-at-home dads? go. We're ready to take your calls. I want to hear thoughts on this. And here's one thing I find fascinating about this topic. So Lucas and I were talking. Lucas is my producer here behind the scenes, helping to bring this show to you. And it was actually a topic he brought up. And so I started to share my thoughts. I'm rattling on before the show. And I was like, well, what are your thoughts? And I could tell, like, Lucas, you were totally choosing your words really wisely here, or carefully. And here's the reason why. And I outright said it. If we're going to talk about the whole idea of whether or not men should be stay-at-home dads, I'm sorry. I'll raise my hand. Yes, I am going to be sexist when talking about stay-at-home dads. It's on the table. You can call me sexist, whatever you want. That's totally fine. But there's a reason. Being sexist in the way that a lot of people refer to that word isn't necessarily a bad thing. And we shouldn't be hesitant to think and always perceive that someone is going to call us sexist. And I think we do have to be careful when talking to someone who's going to jump on our words and choose our words wisely. It's so important. But it's also important to recognize it doesn't matter what you say about male and female today. A lot of people want to say there are no differences, and they want to tell you that you're offensive if you think there are. I was actually just listening to a TED Talk the other day, and the TED Talk, this woman, it was titled something like When I Met My Enemy, and this was a staunch radical feminist, and she was talking about how she decided to review and do a documentary talking to men's rights activists. And so as she started interviewing them for about a year, hours and hours of content, interviewing each man for about 4 to 8 hours, I think she said she interviewed somewhere around 30 different men, she realized with time, after the fact, when she was editing and transcribing the interviews, that she didn't listen to any of them. And that she would hear what she wanted to hear and then would basically jump down their throats, accusing them of being misogynistic, sexist, only thinking about men. And as she sat there and transcribed the interviews, she realized just then that she wasn't hearing what they were saying. And what they were saying wasn't necessarily anything offensive toward women. And so it was a great example about how easy it is for us to accuse someone of being sexist when in reality we're not hearing that there are differences between men and women. There are injustices for men as well as injustices for women. Joining us now to share his thoughts about the topic, and maybe you'd like to share your thoughts as well, the number's 1-888-914-9149. The question of the hour is, should men be stay-at-home dads? Isaac in San Diego is calling. What do you think, Isaac?
Hi, Timmerie, this is Isaac. I think it's a great opportunity for men that can, or dads, to stay home. I joke with my wife when we were getting married that if she ever made enough for the two of us, I would stay home with the kids.
Now, is this something that you and your wife have done and lived out?
Well, it's getting close to being a reality, where it might be enough where we can live off of one income. We're a two-income family, and I know there's that fear, that worry, but I tell my wife, I go, when we were in grad school, we trusted in God, and we turned out fine. And I go, we just need to continue putting our trust in God that we can go to a one-income family and me stay home.
See, and I think this is a beautiful thing, and I think this is where the challenge is, because, and I'd love to get your thoughts here. The idea of a one-income home is something that we're longing for. We want to be more present to the children, to be able to nourish and cultivate the home. But as a man, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think this will challenge you in terms of your experience in the God-given roles of providing and protecting? Will you feel confident? Will this be good for your marriage? What are your thoughts here?
Me personally, I don't think it will. My wife and I, as I mentioned, have talked about it. And I think being able to be home and provide that protective home environment where I'm involved with my kids as opposed to not being involved because I'm working full-time, especially now that they're going to start middle school and the other one in sixth grade. I have two older daughters. Being a part with them and seeing and having them see that their dad was involved, not just when I got home from work, but seeing their dad involved in their day-to-day lives, especially with so many things that are going on.
This is awesome, Isaac. I love this. Look at that dad from San Diego wanting to be a stay-at-home dad and seeing this. So I have one last question for you. Living on one income, will you still try to work from home at all if that's feasible?
If it's something that I can manage, I'll look into. But I think, and again, I give credit to all the moms that are staying at home. Just staying home and taking care of the household is a full-time job in and of
Amen.
itself. And so I don't know if I would want to do another job. This would be my full-time job.
Awesome testimony. Isaac, thanks so much for calling and giving your perspective on whether or not men should be stay-at-home dads. Share your thoughts. The number's 1-888-914-9149. The reality is, and it's something important that Isaac just emphasized, and it's a perspective that I'm excited to hear. Kids need their parents, and protection can be given to kids by their dad being more present in the home. And I'll share with you why in a minute. Historically, this is really kind of a stupid question in a sense. And I want you to stay with me to hear why that is. And the question that is, in a sense, stupid, but is something we're having to discuss in 2021, is should men be stay-at-home dads? Matt in Illinois is calling now to discuss... Let's see. One income can be done. I'm a father of 8. We're going to be discussing this more. But Matt, how have you guys made one income a reality in your family, and what tips do you have?
Well, I'm a teacher, so a lot of times people say teachers don't make very much. But we decided long ago when we first got married that one of us would stay home and make priority family. So we don't have a lot of excess things, but we have discovered that the more we give to our church and to different things that are important, the Lord provides. And it's been amazing when things just fall into our lap and work out for the best.
What tips do you have for especially any family, but especially young families just starting out, to prioritize one income in the midst of a culture that really kind of marries people to having two incomes?
I would say have those difficult conversations with your spouse about what is most important to you. And to fight those urges to look at everyone else and say, well, yeah, I want that too. And because it is hard. You'll feel yourself pulled lots of times. But if we just had a little bit more, it'd be a little bit easier. But there's a lot of joy in sacrificing for each other and for your family. So have that conversation and spend your money wisely, but give first to God, give then to your spouse, and then there's always seems to be enough for your family.
Amen. That is an incredible rule, having the right perspective, priorities, living within and really below your means. That's Matt in Illinois. I'd love to hear from you. The number is 1-888-914-9149. 2 questions. Should men be stay-at-home dads? The second question, how do you live on one income today as a family? Have you done it? What tips do you have for those who want to? We'll be right back during our marriage hour here on Trending. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio Studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forester.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back to Trending. You're joining us for our weekly marriage hour. The question, or questions of the hour, I want to get your thoughts here. Pretty controversial topic. Maybe you've even found it as a controversy in your own home. Should men be stay-at-home dads? Also, there's a desire for a return to one-income families. If you've lived in a one-income family, how do you make it happen? What tips do you have? Give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149. Okay, so I want to talk for a moment about should men be stay-at-home dads. This is an important conversation that is not being had enough. And there are a lot of opinions on it, but there is some wisdom from the church. Now, I want to nuance this conversation with what was just shared from a caller a few minutes ago, Isaac in San Diego, who shared that they are working to prioritize, and they're almost at a point as a couple where he can be a stay-at-home dad. And one of the things that stood out there is the importance of a father being able to protect his children, being more present. This is a challenge in 2021. So let's talk about it. I think that this is a bit of an odd question to even ask, because historically, the truth of the matter is, many dads in the type of work that was done, from farming to trade, were more intimately involved in their children's lives, physically present throughout the day. In fact, when the children were of an appropriate age, they were working side by side along with a father, not just in learning trades, but in practicing religion, as well as in their education. So, should dads stay home with children or not is really kind of an odd question, because the reality is, the more time a good father gives to his children, the better. But the question at hand is whether or not his need on a intellectual, spiritual, and physical level to protect and provide will be properly fulfilled within him, for himself, for his spouse, and for his overall need to provide, for his overall need of a mission. You see, here's the reality. Any conversation about whether or not a man should be a stay-at-home dad is really going to be a sexist conversation. Fine. I'm a bigot. I'm sexist. That's fine. I think men and women are different. It's on the table. So be it. We have to be willing to go there. You see, the question is it good for a man to be a stay-at-home dad? And is it good for a wife to see her husband be a stay-at-home dad? And finally, is it good for the marriage and the overall family? All of these are important questions. So let's talk about just men for a second. Men have a God-given mission to protect and provide. Now, this is ingrained into the souls and minds and bodies of men, even prior to marriage. You see, when a man views this mission as in jeopardy, there's a floundering that occurs in his life that we're seeing so many unmarried and married men going through, from crippling student loan debt that's impacting the bottom line, from unaffordable housing, preventing men from owning homes and providing the type of roof over their families' heads that they want, loss of job in the job market we've seen, especially over the last 15 years. Also, we see it in the crisis that many fathers find themselves in when they find out they're either going to be a father for the first time or they're expecting another little mouth to feed. What happens? A man's mission is in jeopardy because he's asking himself, how am I going to provide? How am I going to protect? This is because it's a man's God-given mission and role. The history of the church writes and speaks to this over and over again. We have this affirmed recently in the great apostolic letter, Complete My Joy by Bishop Olmsted. We also saw this reiterated about 100 years ago in the teaching of the church, reaffirming what the church has to say about marriage and family in Cassi Connubii by Pope Pius XI. We've seen this over and over again in the history of the church. A man's mission is to protect and provide, not just his family, but in society. And a young man experiences this God-given mission from a very young age. You see, providing occurs physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And often we get confused and forget that it's all of these three. Protecting includes physical and spiritual protection. This is why religion is so important for men to live out as well, because they spiritually must and need to protect their children. In fact, just a thought on this, I received another note just today, and I'm receiving a few of these a week. And it's a trend where you're writing to me about your children who out of nowhere are coming out as transgender, non-binary, you name it. What's happening? There's a spiritual existential crisis because the world is telling children one thing, And the parents, somehow, their ability to protect their children spiritually and physically is being harmed with the internet spaces. Violations through education system that's brainwashing and torturing children to be confused about their identity. You see, this idea of providing and protecting is so important. So that God-given mission of providing and protecting is fundamental for a man. And when his mission is called into jeopardy, there can be a crisis that occurs. This is part of the challenge for some men when it comes to the idea or even thought of being a stay-at-home dad. Will he be able to provide and protect still? Will his provisions and protections look different potentially because of the way the income balances out with perhaps the other spouse working outside of the home? Perhaps some couples can do this, but for many, they often share that this idea is a challenge for them to live out. But at the same time, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we're hearing from a lot of dads who are saying, well, we want to have at least one parent home, so if that means that I'm the parent home, I'm happy to do it because my kids are my priority. So it's an interesting perspective, and we have many people who are having these conversations within the context of their homes and their marriages. But we also have to ponder the interpersonal dimension and the individual dimension and impact it will have on a man's mission and on a woman's identity and mission as well. Let's talk a little bit about women. You see, women have this special gift as spiritual and physical mothers to nourish and nurture the human person. They see another human person in a very special way. The way they're able to grasp on to the interpersonal dimension. And we're going to unpack this just a little bit more. In fact, to speak to this now, Anthony from California is calling to share why he believes or what he believes about whether or not men should be stay-at-home dads. What are your thoughts, Anthony?
Oh, boy. My thoughts.
Bring it.
My thoughts is that absolutely not. I'm what you might consider an old guy, but a man is called to be the priest, the protector, and the provider for his family. And if he's going to step down and let his wife, who's supposed to be the heart of the family, go out and be the provider, then he's really turning her into his own mother. He needs to step, which is taking care of your family. St. Joseph sets that. He shows us the sacrifice in silence that he made for the Holy Family. Mm. A mother should never be called for that. Mm. Her job is as the heart and like you just said, you're very eloquent in what you said. You know, she is the heart and that special place in the home. And Amen. Men and women both love their children, but a woman, that's just something special to be in the home. And if he needs to sacrifice to be out there to make that possible for her to be there with those children, he needs to do it. One income, absolutely. It's not about the income. It's as much as it is about our wants versus our needs. Yes, we want a lot of things, but if we back off and just concentrate on the needs and focus on God, giving first to God, and he will provide everything else we need. We've been taught that. I've been through that. Skipping the meal so the children can eat, but never coming up totally short because God always has provided.
Amen. Anthony, thank you for that witness and the witness of the sacrifice that you've lived out for your family. And to be that voice as a father saying this, you see, this is the take that I lean toward, and I really do lean toward this because I think it's important. And here's the problem, because I think that, and again, we've had some callers agree in the opposite direction, but here's the problem. Many women today are pressured into working to provide a second income or being the primary breadwinner of the family because of weakness and laziness on the part of the husband not willing to do more, the husband not willing to make sacrifices, the husband not willing to say, we're spending too much and we need to decrease our spending, not willing to help put his family in the right trajectory to allow for the heart and the head of the home to be united. As we hear in the great tradition of the church is so important, the husband is the head of the home and the wife is the heart. That is so important. But there is a generation, in fact, many generations, specifically of women now, who are resenting the fact that they've been pushed out of the home into the workforce, and has harbored resentment toward their spouses over this entire situation. It's caused distance in the home with their children and concern and challenges for the children as well. I want to speak briefly to the topic of women further as being the heart of the home. We have more calls coming in. We'll take those in just a moment, but I'd love to hear from you. The number's 1-888-914-9149. Should men be stay-at-home dads? You see, women, as I mentioned before, have this great capacity to nourish and nurture people around them. In fact, the great Saint Edith Stein, who died at Auschwitz, she's also known as Saint Teresa Benedict of the Cross, was her taken name when she became a sister. Now, she speaks about how one of the things that a woman offers to society, men, women, and children, is she helps the family unit, and even when she's involved in the workforce, from atrophy, because she sees the human person. She nourishes and cares for the human person. I'm paraphrasing something she once said, that a woman's soul is a place in which other souls are meant to unfold. That a woman helps to nourish and foster and lead toward the development of the human person. And this is so important. You see, what can happen, as we've seen in some circumstances, is when the husband becomes, let's say, less involved being that primary breadwinner, or when the husband retreats into the home to care for the family, there can often be this collision of domains, of natural inclinations that a woman has toward the nourishing and nurturing, but where she starts to overstep, or there's this collision between her and her husband as he stepped in to that domain and role that's naturally hers, as the church emphasizes. There can be this instinct that the woman has that then there's this questioning and debate between the two, and this confusion with regard to initiative in the nourishing and nurturing of the development. Or there can be this abandonment of the wife and the mother. Abandonment of not being as present in the nourishing and nurturing of the children. And it's not meant to be a criticism, but it's meant to show that this natural God-given gift and role that's given to the woman can be usurped, handed over, or lead to hesitancy in being acted upon. And so this also brings up, and I'm just bringing up some of the challenges and questions, turning to the great traditions of the church and some of the history that we've seen on this. The question also arises that many women ask, will I be able to respect my husband? Will there be a crisis of identity for him in the midst of a feminist culture that emasculates men, that puts women up on a pedestal, that already creates enough marital discord? Will there be a crisis of resentment, of lost responsibility and mission, and gifts given or attempted to be lived out on either side from either spouse? Or will there be new ways to find, to give, in terms of the gifts that each spouse has within the marital role? All of these are great questions, but here are some rules and guidelines that need to be a part of the conversation. We're getting to your calls because I'd love to hear from you on this. The number is 1-888-914-9149. We need to understand the rule of what the church offers. The husband must have and take the God-given role to protect and provide for his family. And he must have the primacy in this place. It's his God-given role. The husband is meant to be the head of the home, and this is part of that. And the wife must be the heart of the home, as Cassie Kanubi in the history of the church emphasizes. And with that, she must be able to nurture and nourish those entrusted to her care within her home. You see, we need to affirm the spaces and the mission given to men and given to women when we discuss things such as this, and leave room for this domain and really for the ownership of these gifts to be lived out within the marital context. I think part of the reason why we're asking these questions is because there's an overemphasis on both husband and wife being outside of the home, and there's this overemphasis on women working. There's this overemphasis today on a radical feminist ideology that removes women from their home and turns fathers away from their children. We need to regain and take initiative yet again in these primary roles as husbands and fathers, wives and mothers. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. We have more calls coming in. Steve in Wisconsin has something to say about being a stay-at-home dad. What do you have to share, Steve?
Hi, Timmerie. I just wanted to thank you for your ministry. You do such a great job, and I agree with every point you've made, other than you might be hard on yourself, calling yourself sexist. The Industrial Revolution caused families to part. You're talking about agriculture and farming, and, I always talk to my wife, the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. You live upstairs, and the butcher is downtown, or down below. And she approached me after a year of marriage, and she grew up. She was born in '60 and grew up in the women's movement. And after a year home with our first child, she goes, I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom. I didn't go to college to be a stay-at-home mom. So I'm like, okay, as a provider, the father, I've got to figure out a workaround here. So what we eventually did, it took about 3 years, but we built a business, and we built the income enough where we were both contributing to the business that we knew that we had a dollar amount that at that point I could leave my corporate job. And so that was back in the 80s and 90s. And our oldest is 37, so and our youngest is going on 20. So I have been given some gifts from God that I had more nurturing skills than my wife, and she had some incredible skills that she brought to the marriage. And I believe I took the leadership. I used to get called stay-at-home dad. But I also, had people go, oh, you have to babysit for your kids. I'm like, I don't have to babysit for my kids. These are my kids. I want to contribute. I'm blessed to be a part of their lives. We grew up in the ward Cleaver, in June Cleaver. Dad came home at 6:00, leave him alone. He's got to unwind, and so I feel real blessed. And, it's like I said, it's been industrialization, the women's movement that have all had huge impacts on this. And I had to find a workaround.
Yeah, Steve, you just hit the nail on the head. We've completely changed the men working outside of the home. It used to be, again, families were united, close in proximity, and realistically, fathers were working from the home. And this testimony you gave to prioritize you working from the home so that you can help nourish and provide and protect for your family is such an incredible witness, and one that we see so many people wanting to live out, but having to work their way to make it happen. If you could give one tip, Steve, to anyone who wants to build a business, work their way toward living on one income or having the father working from home, what tip would that be?
Be open. Don't be too proud. I had people that derogatorily said, oh, you're a stay-at-home dad. I'm like, well, you really don't know the situation. And I did take the leadership in the business. Of course, what we were selling art. So my wife took the lead. I had friends go, well, I'd be much more listen to your wife on decorating tips than you. And Stephanie and my wife would look at each other and go, well, I bought a lot of that art, I was the buyer, and she was, we brought together, I should say. But I had more skills in that area than I kind of led on to. And I just want to say, my patron saint, this is the one thing I want to leave. My patron saint is St. Joseph.
Amen. St. Joseph. He is key in helping men to be the leaders, protectors, and providers of their home. I'll be right back taking more questions. Numbers 1-888-914-9149. Welcome to our Marriage Hour. We'll be right back.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
It's a hot marriage hour here on Trending. The question of the hour has been whether or not a man should be a stay-at-home dad. Lots of thoughts, lots of opinion, some church teaching and thoughts on this. If you missed the conversation, number's 1-888-914-9149. Before we move on to the topic of this desire on the hearts of many husbands and wives to have one income, I want to take a call from Tasha in Minnesota commenting on stay-at-home dads. What are your thoughts, Tasha?
Well, regarding stay-at-home dads, I'm probably, I don't know, going to get in trouble for this, but I think it's pretty emasculating for a man to be a stay-at-home dad. And my husband and I are pretty straightforward with our traditional roles that we've got. And I did tell your screener, but we have the unique happening that he's actually a work-at-home dad, but we don't see him all day. He goes down into his office, and he's doing what he does for our family's financial income, and we see him maybe at lunchtime unless we're gone doing something. We've got 8 children. We own our home. We've got 1 child in college, and we just had we have a newborn, and it's crazy and busy, and we managed to make it work. And I don't know. I get frustrated with the conversation sometimes that I feel like there are a lot of excuses that people make for not being able to have a single income. And I think that with a lot of priority shifting, people can make it work where they wouldn't otherwise think that they could,
Yeah, absolutely. Tasha, one tip you have for transitioning into a single income for those who want to do that?
It's that shifting your priorities. We drive vehicles that are older, and we pay for them with cash. We don't buy them on credit. And it's just a matter of shifting your priorities. So if you want a parent that's a stay-at-home parent, you might have to go without some of the luxuries. You might not be able to buy a new TV every year. You might not be able to fly for your vacations. You might have to drive. You might not be able to order takeout, very regularly, that kind of stuff. So it's just shift your priorities and make sure you have life insurance. Those are the two biggest responsible things I think that any married couple can do to ensure their abilities to have a stay-at-home parent, mother specifically.
Amen. Thank you so much for your witness as a mother, being a stay-at-home mom, raising Catholic children today, and for sharing your candid thoughts. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Okay, the topic has been whether or not men should be stay-at-home dads. Now, connected directly to this, a natural topic that follows is welcoming a single income in your home. Maybe you really want to have your wife home. Maybe you deeply desire to be able to have that presence with your children. You're not alone. In fact, polling is showing from Gallup polls to Forbes that more and more, not just wives, but husbands as well, want their wife, the mother of their children, to be able to be home. A Gallup poll found that the majority of women with children under the age of 18 want to stay home with their children rather than work. In fact, it was 6 out of 10 women would rather be home with their children than work. Not only that, Forbes has revealed in a poll that a stunning 84% of mothers identified financial security to stay home with their children as a goal. So even working moms and other moms as well, all moms, over 8 out of 10 of them had a goal, a trajectory that they wanted to be financially secure so they could be home with their kids. Maybe that's you. Maybe you know a couple or someone who is striving and fighting for this. Don't make it a priority 10 years from now. Make it a priority now. We are seeing crises across the country, worldwide, where kids need their parents. They need their parents present to protect, provide, lead, nourish, nurture their souls, their growing bodies. This is so important. So the question is, how do you make it happen? That's in part what we've been discussing all hour with incredible tips from people who are listening, sharing their experience. This is part of the reason, just from a policy standpoint, for just a moment, bear with me, why so many people are emphasizing education choice. You see, education choice allowing for families to choose where their child will go to school without there just being government perks for public schools, but also the choice of private school, homeschooling, or charter schools. In fact, this is why a lot of people choose charter schools, because they're tired of what's being fed to their children, yet they can't quite afford private schools. Many parents are pressured into two incomes because they don't want their children brainwashed in the school systems today, and some of them don't quite feel comfortable with homeschooling. Although if that's you, I believe in you. You can homeschool. It is possible. I can't tell you how many men and women I've talked to who thought that homeschooling would be impossible until they tried it. Challenging, difficult, at moments a little unbearable. But boy, has it been worth it, is what I hear over and over and over again. You've heard tips today on the show, and if you're just joining us, please head over to relevantradio.com/trending and listen to the show. But more importantly, this is an important topic. Share it, and I'd love to hear from you. Hit the contact tab. What are your thoughts? Do you agree? Disagree? Here's, I think, the number one thing that people are struggling with today when it comes to living under a single income, having mom home. And that is, we are failing to live below our means. Not only are we living beyond our means, not only are we living within our means, we're failing to live below the means. Below the means is what allows for savings and opportunity to provide that opportunity and presence of the mother in the home and a single income for the family. We'll be back tomorrow here on Trending.